Very early in the colonization of the Americas, Europeans purchased or simply seized people of mostly West African origin and brought them to the Americas as slaves. The first African slaves to the Americas were in the early 1500s to Latin America. And the first colony in North America, which is believed to be Jamestown, Virginia, established in 1607, brought the first African slaves 12 years after their founding in 1619. While slavery had existed throughout most of the world's recorded history, slavery in North America was different. Unlike slaves in other times and places of history, American slaves were not seen as human. They were treated as animals, beasts of burden, not deserving of the respect or dignity of human beings. Unlike European slavery, the perceived inferior nature of slaves meant the concept of families was not considered to be part of their existence and need not be respected. Slaves were encouraged to propagate, but family groups were divided. It's critical to understand what happened here. The U.S. history of slavery broke down and destroyed the cultural and family kinship ties of the enslaved peoples. Generation after generation did not have traditional families. Most were not permitted to marry. Fathers were routinely sold and separated from their wives and offspring. Their connection to their religion was destroyed. Their connection to their cultural heritage was destroyed. Their ancestral memories were destroyed. And this is critically different from other immigrant groups who may have been discriminated against, but they maintained as their strength their own culture, religion, family ties, and history. Other immigrant groups maintained an identity and a pride regardless of what others thought of them. The greatest crime of slavery, in my opinion, was not the enslavement itself, but the destruction of the civilization and culture, the very humanity of the imported slaves. It's not surprising that because of this cultural genocide, slavery was a central political issue in the founding of the United States, and it dominated our internal politics for the first 70 years, ultimately resulting in a civil war that wreaked destruction and death throughout the nation. It's difficult to overestimate the impact of slavery on our national development. Following the Civil War, treatment of Black Americans continued to be a dominant issue. While legally free, they were discriminated against, along with other ethnic groups, for another 100 years, often through what was called Jim Crow laws. It's challenging for the current generation of Americans to understand the state of apartheid, or racial separation, that existed in the United States until as recently as my growing up in the 1950s and 60s. You may read about this in your history books. You may get hints of the racism in some movies, The Help, 42, The Butler, Red Tails, 12 Years a Slave, some of the others. But it's so difficult to really understand what things were like even 50 years ago. It's especially difficult for white people who don't have stories told to them by their parents and grandparents. Of course, Blacks and Native Americans were not the only ones who were discriminated against. Immigrants of many types, particularly non-Anglo, were deprived of human rights. We'll read about some of these experiences this week. Some people believe it's exaggerating or even being unpatriotic to say we were a country founded on discrimination and racism, but that just ignores the historical facts. This doesn't mean we haven't changed. It doesn't mean we can't continue to change. That's to our credit. But denying facts is not. And this is our history.